Hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about some of the most common problems that students see in genetics, and that topic is Punnett squares. Now, genetics is it's a topic that covers a wide variety of problems, but Punnett squares are usually the most common problems that students see. And what Punnett squares are essentially they are measures of genetic probability. And what that means is all the problems for Punnett squares, or the vast majority of them, involve two parents that produce offspring, and then the Punnett square is a tool that is used by students in biology and AP biology to determine the probability of the offspring possessing a certain genotype or phenotype. And sometimes you have to work backwards when you are given the probabilities of genotypes, and then you have to construct from going backwards, per se, what the genotypes of the parents are. So analyzing genetics problems, especially in respect to Punnett squares, allows students to analyze what they are given in terms of the problem, calculate genetic frequency and probability for offspring utilizing the Punnett square. So let's take a look at this first problem and see if we can conquer it. So this problem reads, in humans, brown eyes, capital B for the dominant allele, are dominant over the blue eyes, which is a lowercase b for the allele. A brown-eyed man marries a blue-eyed woman, and they have 3 children, 2 of whom are brown-eyed, and 1 of whom is blue-eyed. Draw the Punnett square that illustrates this marriage. What is the man's genotype? What are the genotypes of the children? Okay, so let's just break this down step by step and see what we can figure out. Okay, so what does the problem give us? We know for our first fact that the capital B is the brown-eyed allele. And then by the other converse of this, the lowercase b is the blue-eyed allele. So we know that these alleles with respect to each other, the capital B for brown eyes is the dominant over the blue eyes, lowercase b. So let's start off by imagining all the combinations of these alleles. Now, if we could combine the capital B and the lowercase b alleles and have combinations of 2 alleles, we come up with 3 possible different genotypes. So let's list them out. This will help us in kind of mapping out our solution to this problem. The first genotype combination would be to have 2 of the brown-eyed alleles. So that would be capital B, capital B. That would be the first possible combination for this problem, this genotype. And that would result in brown eyes. So this would be the homozygous dominant genotype for this individual. The second possible combination of allele types for this problem would be the heterozygous combination. And that would be the capital B, lowercase b. And since the brown-eyed allele is dominant over the blue-eyed allele, that would result also in brown eyes. The third possible combination, and final one for this problem, you can probably figure it out by now, but it's the homozygous recessive genotype, which would result in blue eyes. So that would be the lowercase b, lowercase b. So those are the 3 kind of possible genotypes that can result. Okay, so let's go back to this problem. It gives us the information that the man has brown eyes. So we know that the man is either genotype 1 or 2, because if he has brown eyes, those are the only 2 possible combinations that we've listed out that determine the genotype for brown eyes. So we know that the man is either genotype 1 or 2. Second, we know that the woman, for a fact, has blue eyes. And we know that because there's only one possible combination for blue eyes, as given to us by this problem, we know that the woman is genotype 3, as we've listed out. So we know that her genotype is definitely homozygous recessive. Her genotype is definitely 2 recessive alleles. Okay, So now we have to determine what the man and what the woman's genotype is. Well, we already know what the woman's genotype is. It's lowercase b, lowercase b. That's also assumed by the problem. So we had to figure out what the man's genotype is. Okay, so as we know from genetics and as we know from reviewing, we know that the offspring will inherit one allele from each parent. Now, this problem clearly states that they have 3 children, 2 of whom are brown-eyed and 1 of whom is blue-eyed. So we know that the offspring must have, they have different genotypes for eyes, because what that means is they inherit by default, they have to inherit certain types of alleles from one parent in one instance, and then in another instance, they'll receive a different allele from that same parent. The reason why that is because if we create a Punnett square, so let's just quickly draw it out. We have our Punnett square here. Alright, and let's put the mother's genotype on the side. So her genotype is lowercase b, lowercase b. So in all instances, the mother will pass on a lowercase b allele, correct? And then if we assume that the father can be one of 2 genotypes. He'll either be homozygous dominant or heterozygous dominant. So let's just say he is homozygous dominant. That's our first kind of guess, is that the father's genotype is capital B, capital B. Well, let's see what happens. We know that in every instance, the father will then pass on the capital B, or the dominant allele for brown eyes. So what does this result in? This results in a case where 100% of the offspring now have brown eyes, because this is capital B, capital B, capital B, capital B. So in every instance, in this specific Punnett square, the offspring result in brown-eyed offspring. And we know that that can't be the case, because the problem clearly says that one of the children is blue-eyed. So what does that mean? It means that let's try the second option for this, this family's genetic history. And create our second Punnett square. Put the mother's genotype that we know for a fact on the side. Fill in each one of the squares. And then now, instead of homozygous dominant, we'll put heterozygous. Alright, so now we can say that for these two, we'll bring down the dominant allele. So these two inherit the dominant allele for brown eyes, and these two inherit the recessive allele for blue eyes. So, according to this Punnett square, if we have the father with brown eyes and the mother with blue eyes, according to the parameter given to us by the problem, we'll see that 50% of the offspring here have brown eyes and the other 50% have blue eyes. So this does fit in with the parameters of the problem. Half of all offspring, statistically speaking, will have brown eyes, and statistically speaking, 50% or half the offspring of this specific cross will have blue eyes. So we can determine the man's genotype by simply plotting out the possible genotypes for the problem, and then using the information that we are given, we can statistically determine the outcomes and say that because we cancel the fact that the father is homozygous dominant, because if in every case the father would pass on the dominant allele, instead we tried the heterozygous solution for the man's or the father's genotype, and we found that in that instance half of all offspring are brown-eyed offspring and half of the offspring are blue-eyed offspring. So this is the solution to the problem, in that it fits the parameters. It produces children where it's possible to have both brown-eyed and blue-eyed children. Now, since the couple has 3 children, 2 of them end up being brown-eyed, and 1 of whom is blue-eyed. So, in this instance, for the Punnett square, what that means is that the eye color of the child isn't determined by the mother, it's determined by the genotype or the allele that is passed on by the father. Because if you see that the mother will pass on the blue-eyed or the recessive allele regardless of the child's gender or what have you, she will pass on the blue-eyed allele. It's does the father pass on the dominant allele or recessive allele that determines the genotype or the eye color of the offspring. That's what is the factor in this problem. So the second part of the question asks us, what is the man's genotype and what are the genotypes of the children? So we've already determined that the man's genotype is capital B, lowercase b, for the heterozygous determination. Now, what are the genotypes of the children? Well, there's only two really possibilities here. The first one is that the brown-eyed children, their genotype is capital B, lowercase b, which, if we look back to our chart, is option 2. And then the second, what is the genotype of the blue eye? Well, that has to be homozygous recessive, lowercase b. So that's really that problem. And that's kind of just a general way of working it out. So, what else can we do with this? We can kind of make some more generalizations about it. We can make more hypothetical situations in which there are, there's a child or there's a cross between a man with brown eyes and a woman with blue eyes, and if all of them turned out to be brown-eyed offspring, statistically speaking, the man would most likely have a genotype of homozygous dominant, or capital B alleles, because in all instances, the allele that the man is giving to his offspring will produce dominant allele children. So this is kind of a good example of working through a Punnett Square problem. It gives kind of a general overview of how to construct a Punnett Square and what the context of the Punnett Square is, and that it produces genetic probability, not genetic certainty. So this doesn't mean that in 50% of all cases it will produce a brown-eyed offspring definitively, or that half of all children for sure will be blue offspring. There's a chance that all this couple's offspring will be brown, or all this couple's offspring will be blue. It's not definite research or definite quantifications of what these children will have as their genotype. It's simply probability or measure of probability in terms of what the genotypes of the children will be. So hopefully this has helped you in terms of working through Punnett Square problems and giving you a chance to get hands-on with some very common practices and problems in genetics. Thank you for your time.